Welcome to the Substack. Allison and I are kind of newish friends, but many have been conspiring to make sure that we are friends for quite a while. And when I finally met you, I thought, oh my goodness, we could talk for hours. And our worlds just really are so knit together in this beautiful way and disturbing way right now, given what we're going to talk about today. There's so much work to do. There's so much that's, I think, I'll say upsetting us, agitating us, energizing us. I know, and I feel so energized when I talk to you about these things because, I mean, your brain is an amazing thing to crawl around in, and you're an author, you're a professor. You've told me, Jen, listen to the next generation and, what they're saying and what you're learning from them. So I do want to also talk about your teaching.
Yeah. Well, I'm always trying to get everyone in the classroom. So that's a personal agenda I have with you. But you're right. We tessellate beautifully in terms of our interests.
Yes, we do. I love that. So everybody, Alison's book, Higher Ground, work on ethics and leadership. My work, for those of you who don't know me, I've been 20 years in the DEI space, traditionally known as just diversity. And then we started adding on all the letters, all the descriptors, expanding the acronym, which is kind of never a good idea because we lose people along the way. But I liked it because it spoke to the sort of naming things is important and powerful, as you and I know. But boy, when you name things, you also stick that, you're the rusty nail sticking up, aren't you? That gets targeted. So we are in a place of catching our breath, I think, after a pretty rough year or two for both of our fields. So, but it feels kind of like there's a resistance that's forming. There's an energy that's returning. And I wanted to start there. Do you agree? What have we been through? How has it felt for you? And then what are you feeling right now in terms of what animates you and what's energizing you about maybe the near term and also the long term?
Yeah, it's a great place to start. And I'm very curious how this aligns with your timeline. So my book came out in February 2024. 2024 was incredibly busy. I was running around, I was giving talks, and I cover the ESG and sustainability and DEI backlash in some way in the book, though I had no idea how far that was going to go or how big that was going to get. And then honestly, as soon as Trump got inaugurated and went on what we might call a bit of a rampage with US aid and government and DEI and sustainability, I would say that 2025 was a really difficult year for me. It was a difficult year professionally. I felt like there was a lot of fear in the corporate sector. It felt everyone was kind of frozen in place, just trying to kind of keep their heads down and not get targeted. And I had various experiences during 2025 I found really disturbing. 2026, even though objectively a lot of those things have not got better and have in fact got worse, things feel different to me. And I spoke to an editor at HBR yesterday who pretty much said the same thing. So I'm really curious about your reaction. But I feel like Minneapolis was a real turning point when a lot of corporate leaders started to sort of think, well, maybe we've overcorrected. I feel like a lot of corporations now are looking to the midterms and are starting to think about how various things might look in future. It feels as if things are a little bit more fluid. It feels like public opinion is moving. It feels as if there's more kind of back on the table and people are less frozen in place, though there's still a lot of room for chaos. And then I start to see fresh thinking start to emerge, though I think we've got a long way to go on that. What happens to you? Does that align?
Yes, that does align. That aligns perfectly. I think we are, the shock to the system of all of the chaos, the executive orders, the fear that it caused, the ripple effect. I think the getting used, if there's such a thing of getting used to a new reality, and then kind of the innovation and creativity that comes from the scarcity, from the constraints. I've watched my clients and the corporations kind of figure out, oh, this is real, this is not, this is where that boundary is. It just took a while to settle in a sad way. I wish we never had that challenge. But it's been a really interesting challenge too, because I also wonder if the DEI space would never have really changed in the deep way, in the cellular way that I think we were due for, if we had kind of faced this breakage. It's almost like we faced this stopping point, and it was like, you cannot go back. And what I worry about is that we're still tinkering. We're still in this incremental, like, well, if we just do this, and then we can get away with this, and then we can make it, if we just kind of lower things to the legal mean and build from there, it's not the most generative place from which to build. And I do worry that we're still clinging. I think we're still protecting and kind of valid, like trying to justify a lot of the things that we built. And they were really good and they were really important. And we need to rethink them, and we are in a different time now. So now I think this year, what I'm noticing is that the nervous system collectively has kind of settled.
Yeah.
But I think we need to really kind of see this as the gift that it painful as it has been, and unfair, and not, coming from the right place. But I think a field that's been kind of growing in the same way roughly for the last 30 years, 35 years on my side. I've kind of ridden that whole traverse whole journey. We are due for a real shakeup, and shakeups are hard. We have sacred things, like we have things that we're like, but what about this? And we've done it this way, and but I just want us to. I want us to participate in the rethinking. Like I'm excited for a deep rethink, not just a refresh, not just an adjustment, but I think it's like these times are categorically different. And you write a lot about this. You and I are in alignment around, the absence of certainty, the death of the expert in a way, right? The total crisis of trust. I mean, you call it a zero trust economy. And I've been thinking a lot about the contract that used to exist between, and I want to ask you about this, the employee and the employer. That contract, I felt it, and I believed it was real, that we were sort of going this direction for a mutual benefit of more inclusivity, drives business, good for the markets, good for results. And that breaks, or it's broken, doesn't break because it still exists, but somebody breaks it, then like, is the point to rebuild that? Will it ever exist again? Like, what do you really think about how that will, because that powered a lot of our work and a lot of our progress.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it's really interesting to compare and contrast diversity and inclusion and sustainability. Like, I think there was a need for correction absent the backlash, maybe in both places. I think, and you know much more about DEI than I do, it seemed as if we went a little bit too far. We treated too many things as a win-win. We certainly in sustainability, there was a tendency to try to get companies to solve every problem out there. And maybe in the same way, we tried to get corporations to solve racism and inequality and voice and gender issues. And so maybe jointly, there's more of a kind of, what can we really expect from a corporation? What can we not expect? The way I put it in sustainability is more of a focus on where does a corporation have a legitimate voice? Where does it have leverage versus it kind of trying to take over from the government? And then I think you're right in both areas. There's been a bit of a kind of retrenchment to compliance, but that's complicated because the legal system is no longer internationally consistent or anything that you can rely on. So I think the kind of the broader breakdown, right, is around global shared values, and we can rely on things like the UN, and we all are heading in roughly the same direction, and we all want the same things from business. And I think now we're in this much more kind of fraught and divided world where there's no clear anchor. And so this raises all sorts of very interesting questions for how a corporation manages this stuff.
Those anchors were so important because they showed agreement. We came to agreement. We measured ourselves. And in the absence of those, what do you think will take their place? Or is it too soon to tell? And optimally, what would take their place? Because they were imperfect too. I mean, I think the whole kind of belief, what gets measured gets done, could sometimes incentivize not the behavior that we wanted. And it was somehow incomplete. Like I know in the D&I world, you measure diversity and there's resentment. There's, hiring practices and promotion practices that somebody is doing because they are being required to do it. And it's not good for anyone. And yet it was our best way to incentivize the representation that we wanted and needed and deserved. But I always was kind of aware that it drove weird behaviors and perhaps not sustainable realities either, right? It was our, I think, first attempt. It was in our imperfect understanding and perhaps in an immature understanding of how do we incentivize progress. We used what we used, but what would replace it?
Yeah, I don't know. So sort of very similar thing going on in sustainability, where like climate disclosures and setting goals and having numeric targets. And in your world, it was more like targets around gender and race and senior leadership. And I think we all kind of had this idea that that was a step on the way to true inclusion or true sustainability. And I think in both cases, like, that kind of took on a life of its own. So we started to treat reporting and disclosure and legal requirements as a proxy for change. And we didn't maybe think through the wider kind of systemic issues. So I think that's kind of part of it, is that we maybe also didn't acknowledge the trade-offs and the tensions strongly enough. And so now we're in much more of an era of thinking about those trade-offs and tensions. I mean, something I talk about a lot is sort of corporate political responsibility. So in both our worlds, very common to have a net zero target while lobbying in a completely different direction. Very common to be making a lot of noise about supporting women while supporting political candidates that are doing the opposite. And so I think there's something there. Where I think we really kind of need to address younger people's expectations is around this kind of question of authenticity. So my students have this reaction, oh, they're just doing that for PR. That's just performative. They don't really mean that. So this kind of call out of hypocrisy, that kind of closing of the say-do gap, which might mean less ambitious and less PR heavy commitments, but is much more about getting down and doing the work. And then I think also, like in both cases, we treated things that are very, very difficult and very ambiguous and very difficult to measure and require a lot of hard work as if we could, tick some boxes and do some reporting and that would solve the problem. And we're always looking for a shortcut, and that shortcut never works. And so that's where we are today, I think.
I think that's where the hard work begins. And yeah, I think you're summarizing the missing piece for me that I now realize, which is that whatever we measured, again, was sort of the optics and I want to be on the right side of this political issue or that, when the real, I'd rather be dealing with honest reality. And this has been hard to see and realize how little of the systemic change was actually occurring. But we did what we could. I think we have to have a lot of grace for, those of us who used what we could and what we had and what our understanding was at the time. But I agree that like the real work begins now because the veneer has fallen, because we are finally being honest and aided by, I think, that generation that you teach in the classroom. That skepticism is useful. I think a lot of us bought a story and we bought into something generationally that is what is falling apart, in addition to so many other things that are falling apart for us, like in our faith, in our beliefs, in our understanding of systems and democracy. And so in a way, I'm grateful for the honesty. I'd rather be dealing with what is and not be lied to. And then, then we have to decide though, where are we as people who are putting pressure on the system and accountability? What does that look like then? Like when we now know kind of who we're married to here and who we're in it with, what do those kids and what do you, I guess, like suggest? Like, what is the better way? What is the more sustainable, the real work? It's harder, it's more complex, it's more long-term. I know that's true. And that feels really daunting to me.
And we don't have consensus on how far, let's just kind of stick to corporations for the moment. We don't have consensus on how far we want a business to go to solve a profound systemic challenge. So we can set a climate goal. A company can't meet its climate goal without a supportive policy environment, without changing behavior, without investment, etc. You can have a target for gender in leadership. If you don't have the pipeline reflecting that, or if you're trying to solve inequality, how far do you go to invest in the education system? Like, you know, if you're trying to improve the mix of women and men in tech and you don't have the applications in the pipeline, is it your job to change the pipeline, or are you working with what you've got? And so in both sustainability and diversity, I think part of the problem is we don't know where a corporation's responsibility begins and ends. And we didn't maybe necessarily want to have those difficult conversations. We were more like, this will all be a win-win and this will drive this stuff and, you know, it'll galvanize political change. And now I think there's need for a more sort of realistic conversation about the various institutions in society. And maybe, you know, I've never met a business that can prioritize 30 things or that isn't dramatically challenged by a kind of short-term impact on the bottom line. So in that constrained environment, maybe we need to stop kind of pretending that this animal is going to change its spots and start to think about, you know, the pressure points we can really apply and the arguments we can really make.
Yeah. I think I totally think the scope creep of the way that we saw the role of institutions and everything that they could solve and everything they need to address. They weren't
perfect.
In the end
the enemy of the good.
Yes.
What about this sort of suspicious of business? And so I think that came through. And you know, how much you this is kind of how we ended up maybe in this kind of goal setting thing, like, you know, how much you sort of lean into business metrics and try and make your case versus how much you challenge the whole measurement system. Is this real tension in all these fields where we're trying to make business be more ethical and responsible and inclusive?
That's right. Yeah, not making perfect the enemy of the good is one of my favorite sayings. And the sort of I think all these things are clearer in hindsight. I guess I would love to know, Alison, did you have, similar to me, kind of moments of the realization that, you know, what we had been shooting for was unrealistic? Maybe it was always unrealistic, but at moments it felt possible. It felt like within our grasp. And I think we got very eager. We got really excited. We got really impassioned. Why wouldn't you, when you get a chance, when you get an opening like 2020 was, at least, you know, in my world, you know, and so, but painful lessons to learn of wanting so much and wanting so much acceleration as well, like the speed at which we wanted to move and we wanted to make progress. Also, I think back to how much can the body digest? How much can a system, you know, take that in and actually make it sustainable into the muscle of the organization? Like, we were layering a lot on quickly. And I think there were so many lessons to be learned or reminded of, because this is probably a lot of truisms too. I mean, this is not new. This is like old wisdom about how do systems change? How do people change? Like, how do leaders change? How do you change behavior? This stuff is like really complex and long-term. So I do think too, I'm mindful of metabolizing change in systems and people.
And I feel that there was a sort of immune system response. I mean, we are, both our areas of work are fundamentally trying to change existing power dynamics, are threatening vested interests. There's a lot of very powerful financially backed vested interests. Things have been a certain way and have been hard to change for a reason. And so I think you're right. Like, I think we 2020 was kind of amazing and it felt transformative. And then as we went into 2021, I started to see this sort of blaming people kind of infighting and blaming each other. I mean, we're both white women. I think we both kind of know what sort of happened there. So it felt as if, you know, there wasn't maybe enough effort to bring people who are more skeptical along or to meet people where they were, but to seize the moment. And I think, you know, would never blame either of our communities for generating the backlash we're in the middle of. But I do think we need to be informed by it as we move forward, and to really kind of center human cognition and behavior and psychology and realities in our next iteration of all this.
I agree. I think we need to pull in a lot of different disciplines to do that too. I think perhaps we stopped being interdisciplinary in some ways. When I think about my field, we got a little myopic, and, thought we had all the answers. And, there's a righteousness that happens, probably in so many movements. And sort of the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice, and it's bending towards my definition of justice, our definition of justice, right? It's just kind of, get on the train or not, but the train's leaving the station. But I think being interdisciplinary is so, so important. And this is why I love these conversations, because the more kind of disparate expertise domains that can be in those conversations, to say, have we looked at it this way? If we looked at it this way, also more palatable, I suppose. I don't love that word, but to our business stakeholders, what can we bring to those conversations that is categorically different, exciting, relevant, helpful to the business? Like, how can we always wanted to speak the language of the business. And a lot of us in my world anyway, endeavored and spent a lot of time working on how to do that, thinking that that would be the way that we could have the same conversation. And then it turned out to be not enough, right? Even though we were told that it would be enough. We all came from the moral and the altruistic side of the work, right?
Right.
5 years ago, it was like, you got to come in with a business case. You must. So we, whether that's the LGBTQ community, came to the table with the demographics and the buying power of the community, right? And the ways that talent wanted to be recruited and retained, and like we really were prepared, and and to sort of have this all crash down, that it wasn't enough. It was never enough, and they were never really listening. So what is the new conversation that we need to be prepared to have? And this means to me too that we as practitioners really have to go deep into our own reskilling, and so I wonder for you, if you think of yourself as a practitioner, what has changed in your practitioner skill set or grab bag, in terms of what you bring now that you think is going to get the attention, and not just attention, but really feel relevant, like really urgent? Because I think if we're talking about anything right now that's not urgent, it's not going to cut through the noise, and it's not going to gain the partnership and the true attention that we need. But I'm kind of fishing around for that. As a field, I think we're in this weird liminal space of not knowing the right vocabulary, and it's not just changing words, but it's categorically a really different conversation, particularly with the entrance of AI, which we haven't even started to talk about. But I think there's this big elephant in the room now that sort of is where everybody's attention is. And our field is simultaneously like trying to survive, trying to have a new conversation, and trying to enter that conversation so that we can be at that table and influence outcomes there. So it's a lot of change in us and in the conversation.
Yeah. I mean, I wrote, I think, my most successful article ever, and I wrote it in nearly 10 years ago. So that's kind of amazing. It was in HBR. It's called "We Shouldn't Always Need a Business Case to Do the Right Thing," where I noted, and again, like, I've made the business case, I've noted, or I observed at that time, I've never seen it convince a skeptic, because once you're in the realm of numbers, you're fighting over numbers. And it sort of it puts the whole field on the back foot, that you've got to prove your case, rather than we're asking people to prove the case for not being inclusive and for burning the planet and for thinking short term. So you're put in a kind of powerless position, making a case on a load of issues that are intangible and hard to measure. And so you then stand and fall by the business case. And so then if you can't demonstrate that whatever you're suggesting drives alpha or drives higher returns, you've kind of diminished your argument. Whereas, so now I tend to focus on, polarization and political risk and unpredictability. I focus on young people leaking like crazy and not believing anything, and the zero trust economy, and the fact that you need to assume what you're doing is in public, and that, you know, the kind of keep your heads down and anchor to the law is not really working. And so how can we think about these topics in a more kind of strategic and credible way? And how can we be more honest and authentic and not over promise? And so if I go to executives with those kind of arguments and I say, I know it feels like everyone's yelling at you, because they are. I know you are caught between Scylla and Charybdis because we need an Odyssey reference. And I know young people are seeing this and saying this, and you're having these problems. And so trying to kind of anchor to concrete things that are on the executive's mind, and then you can build from there, is somewhat working for me.
Somewhat working. I'm sure, very, very humbly said, but I'm sure it is, because you're using a lot of the words, and the bringing forward the concepts, I think, demonstrates that you're thinking about the same things. You want to be a partner in that exploration, and you can be a partner in that exploration. And, you know, it's meeting the client where they're at. I mean, this is like 101, but, you know, speaking that language, and bringing new vocabulary actually to name the dynamics that are swirling around leaders that I think they haven't really named yet. I'm really enjoying this aha moment of, it is completely ambiguous. It is nonlinear. It is incomprehensible, you know, to quote some futurists, right? We are in a land, unprecedented land, allows the sort of a moment of feeling seen in the struggle. So when you are speaking to leaders, and then you can back that up with data to kind of validate that this moment is indeed unprecedented. And then the question becomes like, where do we go from here?
Right.
And that is a generative, that nobody's getting labeled, nobody's getting shamed, nobody's feeling like they're being yelled at. It is absolutely a generative place from which to create together. And our goal really needs to be to get to this place where we're trusted enough. And I'm speaking now as sort of an advocate, right, consultant, but to get to that conversation, I think then we may have the green light. And that feels good again, to figure it out from here, not trying to impose all of the old tools and the expectations, but to really like kind of hit the restart button, because we are in a categorically different time. I mean, could you continue to elaborate, I guess, what do you say? Just build on the wording that you just described, because I think people are really resonating with it in chat. You know, what do you talk to them about? What do you acknowledge? What do you name? What do you use to back it up? And do you feel that sense of, oh, I'm willing to be a partner with this person to go on a joint exploration now that I understand like who you are, where you're coming from, you're a partner in this. You're not an accountability mechanism. I mean, I always felt like the police, and I didn't coming in and kind of enforcing. And I'm not that, you know, that's not the way I am a practitioner, but I was perceived, and we were perceived that way. And that is so not where the goodness lives. And, you know, you and I know I'll never want to be that. And yet, oh, here comes the whatever, here comes the whatever. I'm like, I'm not even that person. I'm literally like a learner just like you, who's finding these times completely incomprehensible and wondering, how do we keep kindness alive in the business world? Is that even possible? Is it even, you know, that's where
it's so interesting. I mean, I suppose as you were like asking, I feel like I realized I use the same approach in the classroom as I do.
I'm sure you do.
Which is, first of all, like leaning into the skepticism and not cheerleading. So if I'm giving a talk, I start with, you know, it's never been such a stressful time to run a business. There's a great Bloomberg headline recently saying being a CEO sucks apart from the salary. So I use that quote. Stakeholder expectations of business are heightened, trust is diminished. And then I would be very deliberate, you know, this kind of Scylla and Charybdis metaphor. You know, you've got a bunch of people saying none of this stuff matters. Inclusion doesn't matter. Sustainability doesn't matter. Go back to shareholder value. Keep your head down. don't provoke the Trump administration like we're back to Milton Friedman. I explain why that's not workable. But then I also explain why like peak sustainability and peak inclusion isn't workable. Maybe it's not the best idea to tell people to bring their whole selves to work. Maybe it's not the best idea to have 30 environmental and social issues you are claiming to solve. Maybe it's not the best idea to set goals that you can't meet. Maybe we need to acknowledge that often the leading companies get the most flack and the most criticism. So if you make any claim or you make any effort, you'll immediately have a swarm of kind of activists and well-meaning people criticizing what you're doing. Whereas, and so I name that tension, like, the minimalist approach isn't going to work. The maximalist approach isn't credible either. So where can we go? Like, doing nothing isn't an option. So how can I help you craft something where you will be credible, where you are legitimate, where you have leverage, and where we're not getting your organization into the kind of over-promising or putting itself in the front line that, as we can see, draws this criticism, not least from our people, from the sustainability and inclusion people, who are focused on critiquing Patagonia and Target over critiquing Palantir, let's face it. So, I try to be very, I understand, empathetic to what the person is going through and to acknowledge it's not easy, rather than just write a report and set a goal and everything will be great and let me cheerlead, because there you get the backlash. Same thing in the classroom. They all turn up and they're so jaded and they lack agency and they're obsessed with hypocrisy. So rather than me telling them they're wrong, I'm like, yeah, it is.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
Let's talk about it. And then you can kind of get them to a practical path. But if you're pushing back and saying, no, everything's fine, you just get more resistance.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, that was so wise. Everybody needs to go back and listen to that. It's so, it is the pendulum swinging and all those like tired metaphors, but I think this like settling in this liminal space of, it depends, and, sitting in the complexity and the uncertainty. And I know business doesn't like that, right? They want to go one way or the other. So I think what you're talking about, students and with companies, is this, like, who are we and how do we kind of mollify, if that's the word, different groups that are important to us? And it's not doing the bare minimum to keep everybody kind of satisfied.
No, it's a requirement to innovate. So, I've been working with 2 companies, and then I really want to hear from you about what you're doing. But I'm working with 2 companies over the last week. One is doing completely cutting edge, interesting work on measuring social impact of employee well-being in their supply chain factories. This is also an area of like compliance and heads down and risk management, and they are actually investing in innovation. And then another firm who is responding to the kind of inclusion backlash with a massive focus on employee ownership, including people who have historically, been in roles that aren't super lucrative. And so even though this is not framed as a race and gender initiative, it actually does benefit women and people of color, because they also kind of are overweight in those roles. So we can do something radical and that drives change without naming it as what we named it in the past, and it will actually have that effect. Tell me what you're doing.
I love that. I mean, you're making me think of course, the Costco, right? The sort of subtle, low hum of the work, exactly. The sort of, and the not glamorous, perhaps not, shouting from the rooftops, but the good work, right? The good work, the systems work. Exactly. Not glamorous, and yet consistent, the quiet confidence of a company who knows who they are, and is kind of finding this, like walking this tightrope of authenticity and ethics. Yeah. And they have high trust still in this environment. And I just love unpacking that and thinking about, what do leaders say? Who does the company need to be? And what is that relationship that they have with their people that feels like you can ask any person and they say, I trust them. I trust my leadership. And this shows up, this is a classic question in engagement surveys and everything, right? And you and I probably work with a lot of different companies where I get a keynote and they're like, ooh, our trust scores are really low. Like, we're getting really bad feedback about our leadership. And, so we need you to kind of help us, like, either understand that or address it. and make it better, which I'm like, I can't do that in an hour talk,
I
but I
bet
can at least, yeah, I'm good. It might be good, but I'm not that good. But then we have the alternative where, oh, our trust scores are fabulous, and we're just really focusing on, they want more feedback. They want more, understanding of career mobility and whatever. So it's really interesting. You kind of want to be an archaeologist and kind of swim through that and say, like, what did leaders do or say, or how did they show up to maintain what was always beautiful about a healthy, thriving culture of trust,
Mhm.
or what happened to break it. And I just find it so fascinating, because there are leadership choices all along the way here that were made. And yet you and I are not often privy to it because we can't witness it because we're not in it. So we're
Right.
sort of constructing this image of like, well, what must have happened and where did it go this direction? And what will we do to repair it? Is repair even possible? Because I think trust is one of those things, unfortunately, broken in a second, and long memories of employees. So anyway, when you think about a leader's charter right now, which is very difficult, right? It's really everything we're talking about the dancing on the head of a pin that a
Yeah.
company needs to do is what a leader needs to do. And the leader is getting the pressure from oops, I think I might be, oh, here we
No,
go.
you're
The
good.
leader's getting the pressure from the top, and then they're getting the pressure from employees to be transparent, accountable, ethical. And then they have to put their head on the pillow at night and say, I'm proud of the person that I was today as a leader, regardless of what I'm being asked to do that I'm not behind or I don't support. Or so there's a vice squeezing on leaders right now that is really intense.
100%. 100%.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
that hammer point of pressure from above and below. And it's kind of striking to me. I talk to CEOs and they always somewhat describe themselves as powerless. And, they're under pressure from investors and they're under
Yes.
pressure from their boards, and nobody really feels like they've got agency. And so I think there's something, and it's a really overused word, and I've used it and Thomas, my friend Thomas would really get, but being authentic, like saying you don't know, asking for advice, admitting to, we tried this, it didn't work. Like, I do think there's this tendency in leadership at the moment. You've got to have the answer. You've got to have everything sewn up. You've got to be decisive. You've got to know where you're going. And we have this model of leadership that's still we set strategy, we roll out from the top. We've always got answers. We're incredibly confident. And so I think that's broken. Like, I actually think we needed very different sort of leadership skills, and different sorts of leaders. And I feel like that's happening generationally. I do think we have a new generation of leaders coming up. But then, you can still see that plenty of people adore Elon Musk, and plenty of people, are looking for this more kind of authoritarian view, partly because of the uncertainty. So I think a lot of where I would focus on leadership is like, you don't need to have all the answers. How about, I don't know, what do you think? And that doesn't mean you have to open up everything to debate, but I think a little bit more acknowledgement of uncertainty is a good place to start.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love, by the way, I'm imagining your students and their skepticism and cynicism and you saying, let's talk about it.
Mhm.
Me too. And let's flesh it out. I'd love you to say to them, tell me how you would communicate this complexity to people. Like, what would you say? And I'm sure you have,
Right.
and I love that challenge for them because you're right. They are going to bring change and they are. I think it was our generation that I think wasn't able to, and I don't know, I still wonder because we do hold many positions of power, most positions of power. And I'm sensing we are not great at this. And I don't know if we can get there. However, I look down the line and I say, these leaders, we're counting on them to have a different language, to have a different level of transparency and be comfortable expressing that transparency and comfortable with what we don't mean authenticity, like bring your full self to work.
No.
We mean authenticity, like talk about what's real, what we know, what we don't know, what's important to you, who you are, because that's a huge part of believing in someone. And therefore, okay, I'll follow you and I won't be cynical about you. But I love that you're putting it to the students to say you are going to be in these seats at some point, and you're going to have to be really good at inspiring hope, keeping people involved, enabling them to believe where you're going, having a vision, and also communicating the ambivalence and the unfortunateness of our moment too, like the things that don't go your way. That Allison, did I lose you? I think we lost Allison. Oh goodness, love that Wi-Fi up in the mountains, everybody. It is a wilderness moment here. But she will return. Anyway, I will vamp while we are waiting for Allison to rejoin. But I guess everybody, what I was saying, and I'm just going to take a moment to say hello to some folks in the chat. Hello, Carlo and Kristen, and all your comments. I'm loving it. Please keep them coming if you're still here and any of this stimulates you and you have some questions for me and or Allison to answer. Yes, we're on a roll. So yeah, as I was saying, I deeply want all generations of leaders to really grapple with, and it's going to be harder for some than others, to figuring out a new language in which to communicate that somehow balances the truth, the reality, and why people get motivated to do anything. Why do we believe anything? Why do we believe anyone? It's through an exciting vision. It's through realism too, right? It's not fake. It's not cheerleading like Alison was talking about. And really naming things and being honest with people too. And like Alison was saying, we still don't see this, even though we've been wanting this for a long time. And I think encouraging it and trying to equip leaders with a different script, a different language with which to speak to all generations, right? But I think the most emotionally aware leaders get this. But it is a very long, I think, road to travel when something else has made you successful, when something else has gotten you success and to the point where you're at, and to the authority that you have and the seniority that you have and maybe the salary that you have. All of these things, I think, are difficult to kind of say, okay, what got me here won't get me there. To quote Marshall Goldsmith, one of my favorite quotes. It's such a powerful concept, and it's extremely vulnerable to use new language, to speak about different things, to couch things in different ways, to show up imperfect, to show up and say, I don't have the answers right now. Here's what I'm curious about. Here's what you can count on me for. Here's what I will be exploring. Here's what I need from you and what's important to you. And here's what's important to me about your contribution. All of these things feel honest to people, and I think continue to kind of deepen the trust, even if what you're telling people causes a lot of change and a lot of discomfort in the people that you're communicating to. And let's face it, this moment is really uncomfortable. We are being we have fear in our workplaces about our futures. We have fear about our job security. We have fear about our technical skills. We have fears about, am I going to be able to change? And towards this new metric of success that apparently is now important to and critical to companies and to my employer, am I going to be able to make it? And these fundamental, this destabilization is super distracting from the work and creativity and innovation and partnering and all those things that we need. So I love, Kristen just said, it's a sweet spot between arrogance and imposter syndrome. The confidence comes from not needing to know. The leaders that will resonate will be the ones that are comfortable sitting in the questions and communicating that they're sitting in the questions. And then enlisting others in the inquiry, enlisting others in the exploration of the questions, and even in the generation of additional questions. Imagine you heard a leader speaking like that, inviting you into a process of questioning and not knowing, inviting you into the exploration, saying you matter to this, you are significant to this, our next steps. You are a part of this and you are a necessary part of it. I don't think a lot of people are hearing that. And there is ample opportunity. There are so many questions right now. It's not a dearth of things that need exploring and need representation, right? As we know, a lot of us haven't been at the decision-making table in the D&I world. We've been talking about this for decades. Now more than ever, though, with what we're exploring, the complexity of it, the sheer implications for humanity, that table, who is there, who's inputting, who's contributing, who's getting that good creative abrasion. Anyway, everybody, I seem to have totally lost Allison, and I maybe thought she would reappear to my screen, but I'm not seeing her. Oh goodness. Anyway, well, I think I will just keep riffing. Let me see if I can invite her back. Let's see if this works, everybody. She is re-invited. Maybe she's back online. Anyway, but thank you for your comments. Kristen, you also said, who are we, is a central question that many companies can't answer, hence getting blown about by the shifting winds. Who are we? Who are we? Who have we been? Who were we for? Who are we for now still? What are we for? What do we exist to do? Alison was making a beautiful point about the overreach of the role of the organization, the role of the institution, right? The way that the power pendulum really swung hard towards employee voice. And when we had that moment and when that door was opened, we ran through it and we rushed through it. And there were so many things we'd been waiting, I think, to do and to accomplish and to share and to educate about. And it was intoxicating and incredible to think you have this opening in history. And I'm speaking about, 5 or 6 years ago. And so now, it's not the abundance. It doesn't feel like the abundance of the abundance we felt. I would argue, though, there have never been richer times to be alive and to be advocating for humans. I feel myself so kind of overstimulated with these deep existential questions. It is a rich, fertile time for us to, be, I think, like just even charting the territory. What is this? What is that? What is this new dynamic? What have we learned? What is this kind of new reality? And we get to be in inquiry and in that exploration with our partners, our clients, whoever you do the work for or with. And we get to bring a new conversation to it. If they're not thinking about it, and I'll say we, if all of you, some of you may be internal change makers, entrepreneurs, some of you may be external, but the conversation that Alison began to describe is a new one that we can bring and that we must bring. And it is new language. And I would encourage us to begin to speak about bigger things, different things, dynamics, headwinds, challenges of uncertainty. We begin to, I think, co-create a new language as partners to those who have a lot of influence for change. So I'm finding that really animating, and it's stretching me. And I am not at all leaving behind a lot of the things that I have always been committed to, but I'm finding that it's an expansion. It's a yes, and it's a plus, not just 1, but 5. I mean, it's sort of involving I think of it like involving all of these corners of my brain and my thoughts and my ideas that I haven't really been able to bring to bear. And it is really satisfying and exciting. And I think will actually, ironically, get us back to a table where we are participating. But maybe what got us here and what got us to the table before is not going to be what brings us to the table now. And so that challenge is super rich. And Kristen, thank you for another question. To what extent do I see backlash as an inevitable response to progress? It's an indicator of progress. Isn't there a risk to being too quick to concede defeat? Yeah, interesting. Yeah, but I'll say, Kristen, too, that it feels like if we square off into a binary that had I would describe the feeling was a very kind of right and wrong binary that took hold in the last 5 years of the work. I think it was always there, but the backlash, kind of, when we had the ball, we ran with it really hard, and it was like, get on or move aside. And then it switched to somebody else having the ball, and we're sort of feeling like we have no choice and feeling like we have to get on board and, but we're powerless. And I kind of wonder if there's another frame in which we can exist together, another field that we can go enter together to explore. because this polarization felt kind of, to me, not generative. It was sort of a us or them, and we get ahead, this falls behind, and then now it's like this. And I don't know. There's an element of that feels like neither moves forward in a meaningful way because we're not moving forward together. And it's a classic. If you want to go far, go together. I mean, it's the proverb. It's such a beautiful image. But what does true inclusion really look like at this moment in time? I don't just want to fight to have you include me, and you're not including me. But it's a bigger question of inclusion of humans in the system as we're going forward. And I think it's almost bipartisan, but it's a question, especially in the face of AI and tech, like what will a solution look like that actually crosses the binaries, that establishes a mutual ground of exploration, caring, respect, and questioning? What is this going to look like in a way that honors humans? And I think we have this new kind of adversary, if you'll pardon the word, that is bigger than all of us. And it has is effect of joining strange bedfellows. It has an effect of, I think, in weird ways, potentially depolarizing us and coming together to explore something that is incredibly urgent for our survival and for our thriving. So, but I know that is what you describe as an element that is in the water. And we talk about it a lot, to say, oh, we were so successful. Look, they now hate us even more. And now they're trying to beat us down. But we were right all along, and we're going to continue to be right. We are going to continue to, travel that arc of the moral universe towards justice. Yes. But how we go about that and who we go about it with, I think that is what we should be challenging ourselves to think about. I don't know. That's my personal opinion about it. And having sat with the backlash for a couple of years now and suffered through it and been heartbroken and angry and defiant and justifying and trying to protect and save, in a way, our good work. I'm so tempted to do that. And every time I do that, I think to myself, I should be evolving into something I don't yet understand. That is my job right now. I don't think I can understand the role that I will play, in the short term and the long term, but I'm listening and I'm paying attention and I'm present. And I'm also happy to critique our movement and my own positioning in that movement, because I think every movement has to critique itself. We have to understand, like, what did we do well and what could we have done better? Not that it caused the backlash, but that it is really, really important. If we do not learn the lessons that we need to learn now, we risk carrying faulty foundations ahead with us. And we can't afford that. We are in shifting landscapes where we cannot predicate a lot of what we do now on what we used to work. I think of the D&I work that I used to do, kind of had these footholds and handholds, like I'm on a climbing wall. If I do this, then this changes, and I can hold on to this, and this is true, and this is real for business, and I can use this to make this argument, and I will see the change. But Alison was talking about the nonlinearity, the incomprehensibility, the swirl, the inability to measure anymore, the inability to even agree on the standards anymore. How can you operate in a standardless world? How do you advocate for change when there's no holds right on the wall? And I think that if we think about it that way, it does kind of completely destabilize you from the things you knew and the things you knew worked. And yet I do believe there is an understanding ahead of us of things that will work, but they must be birthed right now. They can't be pulled from the past. And the other image that comes to me a lot is like a crossing of a whitewater river. How much can you take across that river? How light do you have to be? How agile do you have to be? What can you take with you in order to cross it? You can't take much, because it will be your downfall. So you can pack that backpack with all of your favorite things, but you're going to have to be so agile, and the less you have, the better. And you have to trust your instincts that we have developed over many, many, many years of being professionals in this world, instincts that are going to hold us now. And this is intuition. This is emotional intelligence. This is it's intuition about the moment. It is what people need, what they don't yet know, what needs to be named. Like, how can I just shine a light at the very least? How can I be your river guide? But I am knowing that I haven't been on this river before. So what do you do when you're in unfamiliar terrain? And what do you fall back on? In yourself. And I think that's a beautiful invitation to kind of reskill and, redevelop who we are in this moment and how we partner with institutions, with leaders, with each other, et cetera. Anyway, oh, this is wonderful, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm so sorry we lost Alison, and thank you for Kristen, Carlo, especially. I'm loving reading your comments. Carlo, I want to just read what you said. We need a new language. The amount of companies fleeing from commitments, the risk of organizations delivering the work potentially going away due to lack of customers and business. There is going to be a pain point that comes, Carlo, to your point. It's already happening. The pain that we've seen some companies go through because their inauthenticity and their absolute betrayal and abandonment of certain things. But I would also say these stories are more complicated than that. I think there is much that we don't know, and it's never simple what has happened with the companies who were in the barrel in the early days, made some wrong decisions, had a long history of supporting some of the values that we share on this call. It's complicated. And Alison said this, right? When she stands in front of her students, she has to kind of be in this middle place of acknowledging their cynicism and saying, like, it is a mixed bag. There aren't clear good guys and bad guys in this. And redemption is possible, or we don't know the whole story. Is it better to fly loud and proud and big and put yourself out there? Is it better to have a low profile and keep plodding along with the good work that you don't talk about, that isn't glamorous, that where is your time and your energy best spent? It is something I think we're figuring out, and I think companies and brands are figuring out. And if we can be partners in that journey and not apply a standard to it that we think we know of purity, but embark on the exploration together, I think is a much more fruitful way. I mean, we're literally all figuring it out as we're going along, and this is a very difficult time. So thank you for all of your thoughts. It's so good to see you. Good to meet you, Kristen. I appreciate others that have jumped on, Susan and Lewis and Amber, and I see some old friends and new here. I hope you enjoyed meeting Alison, and if I'm new to all of you, it's a pleasure to meet you and have you here. And Alison and I didn't get to talk about our new projects together, but we will be back with more information on that. So with that, thanks for joining us. Nice to see you. Take care of yourselves and continue to live in the liminal space and explore with the people and the organizations you care about.